And a good day to you, Explorer Nation. John Lynskey, your ambassador for alumni affairs, here with season 5, episode 15 of Looking Back with Lynskey. And today's special guest has been a mainstay of the English department for 24 years, call it a quarter of a century. Let's just round it off. Brooklyn born, not a Columbus guy, but might as well be a Columbus guy. Uh, Started the lacrosse program at Columbus High School. He's a man of many talents who has always managed to stay under the radar until now. So, Explore Nation, join me in giving a warm welcome to the one and only Mr. Cody Morrissey. Cody, welcome, buddy.
Thanks.
Good to
Thanks
have
for
you.
having me. Great to be here and looking forward to this.
Yeah, we're going to have a journey here. So Cody, yeah, you're not from Miami, you're from Brooklyn. And
Yeah.
for most people, particularly people born in Miami, Brooklyn has this aura about it, gangsters and De Niro and things like that. What was it really like growing up? Because the truth is it's not actually like that.
Well,
In some areas, yes. Yeah.
maybe not now, but
In the
truth
day.
speaking, the 1970s and 1980s in New York and Brooklyn was no joke. It was somewhat like that. I like to say, if you've ever seen the movie The Bronx Tale,
Yeah.
my life is sort of a watered down version of that because a lot of the things in that movie I experienced, on a certain level. But Brooklyn was, I would never give up growing up in Brooklyn for anything. But nowadays, Brooklyn is the center of New York. It's where you want to be. It's where everybody wants to live, even more so perhaps than Manhattan. It's probably cheaper, or maybe not, maybe cheaper.
Well, I think you're absolutely right because talking to the guys that live in New York, many of them have done exactly that, gotten out of Manhattan and moved to Brooklyn. And Brooklyn's a microcosm of New York in that, yeah, you've got extreme poverty there, but then you've got the uber rich there as well. And
Yeah.
then, there are the so-called working class, if there is such a thing in America anymore. So I've only visited. I've never lived there, but a very intriguing place, no doubt.
Yeah, I grew up in a place called Park Slope, which now is like the center of where you want to be in Brooklyn. It's like the most coveted neighborhood. But when I was living there, it was still a good neighborhood, but there were certain avenues you didn't go below.
Yeah,
I
sure.
lived between 6th and 7th Avenue, but if you went below 6th Avenue, you were, like my dad used to say, it's like Beirut. You don't want to do that.
Yeah.
But it's really improved the neighborhood. Like everything else, it's become somewhat gentrified. But when I go back, it's still I still have those great memories. I loved growing up in Brooklyn.
Yeah, no doubt about that. So you were a public school kid. You were not a Catholic school kid. Talk about public school in Brooklyn.
Okay, well, that was for me. I used to walk to school in first grade. The first school I went to was PS 321, which was literally down the block from my house, so I
Okay.
could walk to school. But middle school was probably the toughest time for me. I went to a school called IS 88, which I had to take public transportation to. Which when I got home, I was just glad I made it home. The bus ride to that school was always a dangerous thing.
Mm.
Many times got into altercations on the bus. It was like a good opportunity for you to get mugged. They would catch you in the back of the bus, come through the back door. So a lot of times I would walk home from school, and IS 88 is notorious for having that kind of reputation as kind of a rough place. So middle school doesn't. I don't have many good memories of middle school, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. A lot of fat lips, a lot of black eyes, I got mugged a few times. I had my sneakers taken from me. So middle school was kind of tough, but high school was a big change for me once I made it through middle school. Because growing up in New York, you're zoned for what high school you need to go to, and mine was a school called John Jay, which was affectionately known as Jungle Jay, because the school was notorious, like IS 88, for having a lot of problems. So I was able to get into a school called John Dewey, which was almost like a more progressive school. It had block scheduling. It was one of the first schools to have block scheduling, very similar to what we have now.
Wow, back then they had block scheduling. That's
Yes. And
wow.
and the only difference between their schedule and I guess our schedule now here at Columbus is that we also had huge chunks of free time in the middle of the day, which again, I sometimes took advantage of as far as not being on campus or perhaps taking off to Coney Island, that's where the school was. It was actually in the middle of a train yard in Coney Island, but it was a great school. It was actually a school where Spike Lee went to, but it
Okay.
was also a very progressive school. For example, Dr. Ruth Westheimer spoke at my graduation. So if that doesn't sort of sum up
It says, it says something. Yes.
yeah. The headline of the Daily News the next day says, Dr. Ruth tells grads to have good sex. And she did say that at my graduation.
Of
Yes.
course she did. Of course she did. Cody,
Very-
for the geographically challenged, you have a map of New York City over your left shoulder. Show everyone where Brooklyn is, Cody.
Well, this is Brooklyn right here. The biggest, best borough there is in New York City. And I grew up here and had to go to high school there. So I would take the F train. It took me about an hour, actually, every day to get to school. I would take the F train from 7th Avenue in Park Slope all the way to Coney Island Stillo Avenue, which is the last stop, conveniently, so I could sleep. And then I'd be woken up by the train conductor. And then I would have to jump on the B train and take that back one stop to Bay 50th. But the good news thing was that when I got off the train, my school was like right there because it was in the middle of a train yard. I mean, it had 10-foot fences around it with barbed wire because at that time, tagging up trains was a big thing. So they had to protect the trains.
Yeah. So you graduate high school and talk about your college years and everything that went down there. And then we'll get into education.
So my senior year in high school, I took a marine biology class. So I got it in my head that I wanted to be a marine biologist. And that was my first thought as far as what I wanted to study. So I applied to a school, Long Island University, Southampton, that had a marine biology program, which was conveniently located in the Hamptons. Yes.
Southampton. Yes. Right. Okay.
Southampton. So I went from Brooklyn to Southampton, and pretty quickly fell in love with that area and that whole aura of being in the Hamptons. I kind of related to the book, The Great Gatsby, where Nick Carraway, he has these dreams of what the world is like, and he wants to be part of that world. And I was very much like that as well. Growing up in Brooklyn, middle-class family. My dad worked for the post office. My mom was a teacher. And all of a sudden, I'm in the Hamptons, So that was quite the experience, but I only lasted a half a semester as a marine bio major because chemistry was a big problem.
Yes.
Math, anything mathematical, I just, essentially I played with a fish tank senior year, and what I thought marine biology was going to be about. So the good thing was I was always a good student in English class. I always read. My dad was a guy that read a lot. He gave me books at a very early age. So I was an English minor, and I flipped those majors. I dropped marine bio and became an English writing major.
And your mom being a school teacher, I was going to ask you, because as soon as you mentioned The Great Gatsby, there we go, right into English. So you grew up with books, just loved to read.
Yeah, my dad gave me books all the time. I remember reading, the first book he gave me was Of Mice and Men. And I'm talking about like 4th or 5th grade. I remember reading that book, and that had a huge impact on me as far as the story, the relationship between George and Lenny, and then the book itself, Steinbeck as an author. And then from that moment on, he would always just give me books. And we always had books in the house. He was an avid reader. I became an avid reader. So that really ignited sort of my interest in English and the English language, and especially stories, novels.
When did the notion cross your mind? Because we all have different, paths. When did the notion cross your mind? Hey, maybe I want to be an English teacher.
Well, I never really did, to be quite honest. Um,
Perfect.
my idea once I graduated was I wanted to be a journalist. I wanted to
Okay.
write.
Okay.
And I quickly found out that in order to do that, you really have to start at the very, very bottom. And back then, of course, they wouldn't really have the opportunity that they do today with blogs. You could be a writer anytime you want. I mean, you could do your own thing and then hopefully get discovered. But so what ended up happening was out of school, since my mother was a teacher at a school called Brooklyn Friends, she said, well, look, while you're looking for a job, why don't you come? Because I used to always work the summer camps with her. I was always around children. I always worked with children, always enjoyed doing that. She said, why don't you get a job, work here at this school for a little bit? There is a job opening. And I was a pre-K teacher. So I taught pre-K.
Oh, geez.
Really? For the first 2 years of my teaching career, I was a pre-K assistant, which taught me a lot about dealing with children and learning how to work with children, which I still use some of those techniques today. I mean, kids are kids.
Going to say that there are probably some moments in A23 where you still think you're teaching
Right.
pre-K, but
Yes. Other than taking out their mats and getting their lunch from their cubbies, it's not that much different. But yeah, that taught me a lot. That experience taught me a lot. I did that for 2 years, and then I actually taught phys ed for close to 6 years. Well, actually 4 years, 4 more years in Brooklyn. At the same school, Brooklyn Friends, and then through that I coached everything. I coached baseball, soccer, tennis. I mean, I basically, because I was always pretty athletic, I always played sports, and that's really how my teaching career began. I didn't start teaching English till I got to Miami, to Florida.
Okay, which is all right. So you're teaching PE and everything up in New York. So the obvious question is, how did you get to Miami and how did you get to Columbus?
Okay, well, Miami was my wife. I met my wife in New York. She went to University of Miami, graduated. She came to New York. She was working at a sports marketing firm called ISI, which was like one of the first sports marketing firms there was. Represented all the Giants, all the Knicks. So we met in New York, and eventually started dating, and then that led to us getting engaged, and then eventually being married. We got married down here in Miami, but the idea was always to move down to Miami, which we did. So I moved down here in 1997.
Okay.
The summer of 1997. And her brother, or her sister's husband, my brother-in-law, graduated from Columbus. And he had contact with Father Dennison. So Father Dennison is the connection between me and Columbus. So I spoke to him. He had a job for me at a school called St. Andrews, which is in Coral Springs. It was a middle school. So when I moved down that summer, I started working at that school, and I did that for 2 years. And me and my wife were going to start a family. And I said, look, I can't keep commuting from the beach to Coral Springs. We're moving to Kendall. And he said, listen, I have a perfect school for you. So he sort of set up that interview for me. He knew they needed an English teacher.
You're talking about Columbus.
Yes, I'm talking about Columbus. So he set up the interview for me. He wasn't working here at the time. He eventually came back.
Yeah.
But that's my road to Columbus. It was really Father Dennison.
And Father Dennison had an impact on so many people, no doubt about it. So who did you interview with, Cody?
I think it was Chris McKeon, Brother Angelo, and Pat Call.
Okay.
I think it was those three. It was during that summer.
And you and Fred have that New York connection.
Yeah, that was nice right away because, and even the brothers, all the brothers really from New York. They were Irish guys from New York. My family, my father's side is all Irish. They all grew up in Jackson Heights, for the most part, Queens, and a lot of my father's family was from there. So there was immediate kind of connection. I was like, okay, there's some people I can actually relate to and talk to, at least on some level. And Fred was great, right from the start, a big help and a big influence on me and taught me a lot.
So what was your initial, I mean, you're an athletic guy, you played sports and everything, and that's a big part of an all boys high school, but what was your initial impression of Columbus High School 24 years ago?
Yeah, well, this was a different place back
Yeah.
then. There was a different breed of cat, so to speak, in the classroom. My first class was Pat Lee, Alex Toth, to name a few. Wonderful, beautiful people, but certainly characters. And this was phase two English, which of course we had back then. It
Yes.
was all boys.
Yeah.
It was difficult. I had a difficult time. I mean, no doubt that first year was kind of rough. I had to kind of weave my way through what was, how to be accepted, how to be respected. But
Okay, let me ask you, what did you do to earn their respect? Because you hit the nail on the head. It's great if they like you, but they got to respect you. So,
right,
how
yeah,
did you present yourself?
I think what it was I didn't let them get away with anything. I knew. I remembered talking to Father Dennison, and we were having a conversation about the teachers in our lives and the ones we remembered most. And we both kind of agreed that the one teachers that we remembered most were the ones that we didn't like that much when we had them, because they were so hard on us. But the ones that were hard on us actually taught us more than the ones that let us get away with a lot. And then I think it was Chris McKeon who, because at that time people were just sending people down to detention at will. And he gave me a good bit of advice. He said, you have to start taking care of stuff in your own classroom. Otherwise, you're just letting them know your problems are being solved outside of it. And then they'll
Handle
never.
your own problems.
And
Yes.
that's something that's always stuck with me. And can't even remember the last time I sent someone to detention. I mean, it just doesn't happen. And it's a different breed of kid these days, but I don't have the issues that I used to. That's for sure.
No, and the fact of the matter is you're a pretty laid back, mellow guy, which is how you can be now because you've been there for so long and it didn't take you all that long to get there. But you're right, when you're teaching the not yet smart, you got to make a stand, particularly back then. And I think another thing, in knowing you the way I do, you were prepared.
Yeah.
You were prepared. And
Well, maybe not so much that first year, to be quite
but
honest.
hey, you were a day ahead. That's
Right.
prepared.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, there was no Lavala. I remember getting the textbooks for what I was going to teach the day before class started. That
Yeah.
was kind of interesting. It was a different place. But again, you look back on that and then, you got through it. That's the key. I mean, you got to survive, and then you learn every year, you learn as you go.
And you're still learning because
Yes.
things have changed so much, which we'll get into being an English teacher in the 2020s. One thing that is going to make a lot of people at Columbus jealous when they hear this, you never had to pay your dues and be a traveling teacher. You had your own room from day one.
Javier Rodriguez,
No.
Ah,
Yes.
freshman year.
Mr.
Of course.
Listeners.
Of course.
393, Javier Rodriguez,
That's Bob.
freshman year. Please report to the front of the A building. Thank you.
No, I don't know why that is, to be quite honest.
I don't know either.
My first year I was in B14, and I believe I was there 6 years. And then for whatever reason, I then was in D18. And since then I've been here. I don't know why. I didn't ever really want to admit that. Because now I'm kind of a little concerned, especially what's happening with the A building, that they're going to hear this and I'm going to find myself pulling a little wagon around school, which I don't want to do. But yes, that is true. I've never really said that to anybody because, again, it's something I don't want to share and then have to pay for later on. But no, for whatever reason, I've never traveled.
Yeah, you were the chosen one because I never heard anybody else but you. That's awesome. So talk about your methods of, and obviously times, I hate to use the cliche, but times have changed. How did you originally engage kids in getting interested in reading and writing and studying literature and enjoying it. I mean,
Yeah,
because there's an art form to that.
yeah, I think look, it is much tougher than it used to be, but it was always tough. I mean,
Yeah.
getting kids to read is not an easy thing. I think the thing that works best for me is to make them understand that there's always a connection between them and the story. They're, you know, I always try to explain to them that the stories, the movies, the books, the novels that we love most are usually something that remind us something of ourselves. There's something about that character or that story that either we've lived through or we would like to live through or we'd like to experience. And so there's always a connection we can make. And then the other thing is, I think, connecting it with history. You know, I teach juniors, you know, so I teach American literature, and we go down the chronological order of the genres of American literature. And I always try to make the connection between what was going on historically at the time and connect that to whatever we're reading. So this way they can kind of see that the history reflects literature, literature reflects history, and then try to actually then connect that to something that they know, they've either experienced or the time that they're living in, so that the books become more relevant. So, because we're reading a book, The Great Gatsby was written in 1920, you know, that's 100 years ago. Why are we still reading this book, sir? Right? You know, that's the question, because it's still relevant today. It's a timeless story. It's a story that we could replace the setting, the time period, and it would still work. So that's one of the things I attempt to do. But now I find myself using audiobooks, ed puzzles, videos, because you know, we're dealing with a generation who's very visual. They need to see things. They enjoy audiobooks. Me personally, am not a fan. I do not like listening to someone else read, especially if they're reading slowly, if their voice is annoying. But those are some things I try, but it's getting harder and harder and harder, for sure.
You know, yes, the way we grew up, the tactile sense of holding a book or a newspaper or a
Yeah.
magazine, whatever the case may be, you know, that's just an American tradition. And, you know, that obviously to men of a certain age, that's fine. But to the younger kids, you know, things have changed and technology's great, but to me, and you know, we've never had this discussion. I think it's still very, very, very important because you know, math has changed, yes, and science has changed. Everything's changed, but when you get into English, history to a certain extent, that's communication.
Right.
Writing and reading, that's communication, and that's one thing that technology can't really do for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, and that is my biggest concern in the world we live in today, that the alphabet has shrunk to like 14 letters already because of texting, you
Right.
know. So it's important to try to instill that in them. And I think the one thing you have going for you is you're teaching American lit and
Yeah.
not British lit.
Yeah. I taught British lit, but very
Yeah,
briefly.
bro.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
No,
I don't know how the 12th grade teachers who do that. I mean, you know, I'm having a difficult time with the English language, you know, never mind, you know, an archaic language that they don't even understand. You know, it's a difficult task for sure, you know, but
are there, and I know some of the books you use with the kids in class. I think your angle of hooking them that this is historical and it applies to you, it might be 60 years later, 100 years later, but these characters were you, you know, in a different era.
right.
And I think that's a very important part of what you do. Do you still let them read aloud in class?
No, no,
No?
that's just cannot, that never works. You know, it's great for the guy who's reading aloud because he's actually reading, but to actually think that anybody else is listening to that person read is, you're kidding yourself, you know. You know, I always try to encourage these guys to read, that like all the reading be done at home.
Okay.
And then the class time is for us to have the discussion or the analysis of what we've read. But I also find now, especially with the audiobooks, because I'm telling you, most of these students prefer the audiobooks. So what I will do is allow them time to listen to the chapter in class so that I know, because I'm monitoring them, that they're actually doing it, and then we can reflect and talk on it. But to have one guy read aloud, it's a tough go to expect that people are going to
That's true. Now, do you
absorb
still
that.
read to them occasionally?
No,
Oh,
no.
come on, man.
Yeah.
You got a great reading voice.
I
Come on.
did teach preschool, so I do know how to hold the book and, make sure I'm turning the pages without putting my thumb over the words. But no, we do not read. I do not read to them. So, I mean, every once in a while, I'll read certain passages, or
Yeah,
definitely
yeah.
go through things on the smart board here with them, but not reading entire chapters.
Now, do you try to get them interested in certain authors? Well, before that, who are some of your favorite we're on American Lit. So who are
Yes.
some of your favorite American authors?
Definitely John Steinbeck, because he had an early impression on me. I loved Mice and Men. Ernest Hemingway. I'm very much the kind of modern, postmodern person in terms of the writing style. The less is more type thing,
That's
which
right.
is, again,
Hemingway.
most
Yeah.
students, again, I breathe a sigh of relief when we finally get to that point in the curriculum, because I know I can give them things that they're simplistic enough that they're going to be able to comprehend it. And they enjoy those Hemingway stories for the most part, because they are short.
Yeah.
They're not long. But those authors for me were really the ones that I enjoyed the most as far as American literature is concerned.
And I know Tim O'Brien worked well for
Yeah,
you
yeah. We're actually
because
just started that today. The things
with
they carried.
all the things they carried. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. The
Again,
kids, they really like that book. Again, and part of the reason I think it is the chapters are like their own little stories. You really can pull those chapters out of that book and read them anywhere, anytime, and you don't necessarily need to read them in order. And the material is interesting. They find it fascinating. The way that book is written is quite unique too, as well. So that's something that we actually just started this week.
no, and there's other great new American authors like Mark Halperin and people like that that know how to really tell a story. And
Yeah,
that's as long as they're getting the story and at least seeing or hearing how people put words together, hopefully they can use some of that because, the way we grew up, and again, this is who we are. I love to see how many different ways I could rewrite a sentence, say
right,
the same thing, how many different ways.
right.
And that, not so much anymore.
No, I mean, you learn how to write by reading. I
Sure.
learned how to write because I read, and you learn different nuances and sentence structure and styles by reading. So it's so important, I think, when it comes to writing. But even writing is becoming somewhat of a lost art. To be able to communicate with words is something that's just, it's unfortunately getting harder and harder to really encourage these kids that this is important. With ChatGPT, they basically can, ChatGPT almost anything.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. So this brave new world that we live in,
Yeah.
as again, everybody's got to deal with it, but the English language is based upon communication. And so I know you're adapting, adjusting, modifying, and overcoming, but it was probably a lot easier with the not yet smart 25 years ago
Yeah.
than it is now, which is an
Yeah.
interesting, it is what it is,
Yeah.
you know?
The whole, what is English class now? It's like, I constantly asking myself, what should I be teaching here? Am I, focused on something that's already gone by? Is it too late? So it's something that is constantly changing. So we'll just have to
Yeah.
adapt. Adelante, right? Just keep going.
Adelante, hope dies
Yeah.
last. We've got to keep trying. And I know Mr. Crossman, Keith Crossman, is very much aware of the changing tides of teaching English. And so, just do the best you can with what you got, right?
Yep.
Um, your friendship, we all have those of us who's been there a long time. I'm stuck with OB.
Yeah.
It's just the way it is. But your friendship with Charlie Frazier, now you two are an interesting combination. How
Yeah.
did that come about?
So, when I first started working here, I was, as we said in the beginning of the show, sort of under the radar. I didn't know anybody. I didn't
Yeah.
knew no one. And I just kind of kept to myself. I still had sort of that New Yorker, don't look anybody in the eye, but don't look away attitude,
Yeah.
So I kind of avoided, any kind of relationship with anyone. And Charlie, being who he is, one day as I was walking down the hall, he looked at me and he said, "Hey, you look like you're in shape. Why don't you come run with us?" And I think there was some sort of race that was going on. I'm not really sure what the event was, but he basically kidnapped me, and I ended up doing whatever it was he wanted me to do as far as a physical activity. And we just hit it off. We just both realized we had sort of the same interest. We both were at the time, somewhat athletic, and we would enjoy playing tennis, ping pong, darts. We were both pretty competitive with each other. I just started playing golf, and he's obviously a very good golfer. And we just hit it off. His personality is pretty much the opposite of mine.
Yes.
He's very outgoing, very gregarious. I'm a little bit more reserved, but it's opposites attract, I guess, that type of thing. We just got along really, really well, and have had a really strong friendship ever since. I mean, now going on over 20 years. So, that's how that came to be.
No, you two are a piece of work together. And you share one thing you both share is great enthusiasm for what you do.
Yeah, Charlie is certainly enthusiastic.
I mean, man, he makes math class interesting.
Right. It's
Come
funny
on.
because I was not a math student. I hated math. I hate anything with numbers. You start throwing numbers at me, I'm out of there.
I'm done. Yeah.
And he is the same way with English. So, our kids grew up together. So my son would be struggling with math, and I'd be texting him the math problem that my son was struggling with, and he'd be doing the same thing, sending me his daughter's paper for me to take a look at. So it really worked out pretty well when it came to kind of getting our kids through that without, letting them know that I don't know what you're talking about when it comes to algebra. I never passed algebra.
No.
Yeah.
To me, algebra, numbers and letters don't belong together. There's an alphabet and there's a number line. And so 2x, 3, no, they don't belong together.
Yeah, I still haven't ever used algebra in my daily life. So I know Charlie will tell me, and he'll give me a whole explanation of why it's important, and he has. But I don't know what it was for.
I still don't want to know, don't care. But God bless the people that teach it.
Yes, and I have sat in his class, and I can see why he's great at what he does, because he is, he gets the guys like me who were not interested in math to get interested in math, and to at least pay attention and be alert. So yeah, he's very good at what he does.
Absolutely. So speaking of neighborhoods, I mean, you grew up in a neighborhood in Brooklyn, but you have inhabited a neighborhood at Columbus High School for a long time, the east end of upstairs A building. And we had quite a neighborhood, and you've had some interesting neighbors. A23 has been next to the principal's office for I can't remember. It's been quite some time.
Yeah, we share a wall.
Yeah, you share a wall.
Which I once forgot was the principal on the other side, and was, for whatever reason, showing my students, how to catch and throw a lacrosse ball. And Brother Brady came into my room as I'm banging, a lacrosse ball off the wall, and he's, "Cody, everything's falling off the wall." And I had forgotten I was there. But yeah, I love the A building. I love being where I am. I love being sort of in that, the mix. And it's nice to see Dave, because I feel somewhat connected to what's going on. We shared a wall as well. I used to hear the rat-a-tat-tat of the World War I and II going on in your room all the time.
Yeah.
And then, of course, OB down at the end, yes.
The Iron Manatee.
If you're having a bad day, OB will make you feel better. It's just, he'll let you know your day is not going as bad as his. Right? That's OB, but I love having him down there.
That's so true. That is so spot on. It's
Right.
perfect.
I mean, that's OB. As bad as tired as I am, as miserable as I am, I'll talk to OB and he'll let me know. You think you're having a bad day? Listen to what I just went through. He had to climb through the back window of his car because his door won't open. That was pretty funny. One afternoon, I walk out to the parking lot and his legs are sticking out of the little window, and he's 70-year-old man. And what are you doing? Quite the character.
Sure. The number of times people have asked him, "What are you doing?" Yeah, but it's a great little area up there, and
yes.
you've been there for a while. Now, you were just talking about bouncing lacrosse balls off of Brother Brady's wall.
Yeah.
You, and I don't know if a lot of people know this, you are responsible for bringing lacrosse to Columbus. So growing up in the Northeast, obviously, and growing up down here when I did, lacrosse didn't exist. It did not exist in high school. I wish it had, because you get to hit people with sticks and it's encouraged. What a great sport. But talk about lacrosse, and obviously the Northeast is the hotbed of lacrosse, and how you brought it to Miami and to Columbus, and how the whole thing's it's an intriguing story that I don't think anybody knows.
Yeah, I mean, the truth is, I never played lacrosse before college. I grew up in Brooklyn. I didn't even know what lacrosse was. But when I got to college, I had a work-study program. And a work-study program was basically you had a job on campus that helped pay for your tuition. And my job was giving out intramural equipment. And as I was in the gym and I saw this guy with a lacrosse stick shooting on a goal, and I had no idea what this game was. And I had always been interested in sport. I always played sports. I always played everything. And long story short, me and him became close friends, and I became infatuated with this game, and eventually worked out with him all that whole fall and went out for the team in the spring and was able to make the team. But as far as Columbus,
that's pretty amazing.
Yeah. I was always an all or nothing type of guy when it came to something I'm interested. If I'm interested in something, I'm going all in. And I just was nonstop with the lacrosse stick. I worked all fall on it. And eventually the ironic part was the guy that I ended up becoming close friends with, I eventually took his spot because he broke his collarbone. And that gave me my first start on the field. And from that point on, I just excelled. I really loved that sport. But as far as Columbus, when I first moved down here, and when I first got my job at Columbus, I was actually coaching lacrosse at Gulliver with Jim DeLang. So I guess I was 99 or 97, 98, 99. And then 2000 was the first year that I actually started lacrosse here at Columbus with Jim DeLang's encouragement. Jim always used to say to me, listen, you should start a team at Columbus. Columbus is the place to start a team. They have all the athletes, and at the time, it was just me. We used to practice at Banyan Park in about a foot of grass. The first year, though, I had close to 60 kids. The one thing about Columbus is, and DeLang always says this, and it's so true, that we show up, we always have the turnout, so I never had an issue with numbers. The issue was I was by myself with 60 kids across the street with sticks and balls. Needless to say, Chris and brother Kevin weren't too excited about that. But the first year we were a club team that went 11-2.
Yes.
And I won coach of the year. So immediately we were, kind of putting ourselves on the map. And it really caught on. It really did catch on from that point on. But that's where it started.
So Cody, you're coach of the year. Things are going great. And then there's the rest of the story. And since you have a game coming up shortly, why don't we save the rest of the story for episode 2? What do you think?
Sounds great.
All right. Well, Explorer Nation, I hope you have enjoyed part 1 with Cody Morrissey, and we're going to continue on the lacrosse odyssey and some other things in the next episode. So I've enjoyed this. I've learned a great deal myself. I'm sure you have too. So until part 2, Adelante, Explore Nation. Take it easy, men. It has definitely been buenos tiempos. Thank you, Cody.
Thank you.